Thanks to all of you for coming here today. Thanks for everyone joining online. I've been looking forward to today for a very long time. As a founder, I feel like today is getting very close to why we started this company and what we as Workpath are all about. Yes, our mission is about enabling teams, leaders, organizations to define and achieve their most important goals. But has always been a lot behind that. Yeah? Personally, us, the first couple of people coming together for Workpath, we've always been very curious about how others define and achieve their goals, because we think basically every adventure, every exciting project, every company, any kind of success usually starts with a goal. And for us, it also never has only been about business goals or personal career goals. I think we're facing some very challenging times, times of big change, and also some very demanding goals. Yeah? We work with lots of companies, and it feels we're all in special times and special situations. So there are some goals we have to talk about, and we see that in all the companies we work with, they are in the front and center, that almost feel like we cannot afford missing them. At the same time, there's so much change, there's so much volatility around us that it's very hard to keep focus on those goals. Obviously, and again, we work with dozens of companies, and there's, I think by now, not a single company where stopping global warming, the 1.5-degree goal that we already seem to be missing, does not play a role in a company strategy. Yeah? It is a goal, as I said, that does not just influence stock prices and job security and how we sell. It is something that will not just define our work environment, but really the world we live in. And yeah, it's difficult. It plays a big role in day-to-day work, more and more. And it's something that we cannot afford missing as a goal. Secondly, I think many people here, many organizations here, we've experienced the last couple of years how vulnerable our organizations are, how vulnerable our supply chains are, how dependent we are on certain players. It's why we as individuals have to wait longer for products we order. That's the easiest part, but it's also a driver of inflation and a lot of difficulties behind that. So another huge dimension of goals that defines the strategies of the companies we work with, and it definitely didn't get easier to work on those. Last but not least, talent, and it's not just about attracting talent and enabling and developing and retaining talent. We have hundreds of thousands of jobs that are not, or positions that are not filled. This is, I think, not just about providing more attractive work environments and making sure that we are more inclusive and diverse workplaces. This is about bigger questions like education and migration, also something that over the last 3 to 4 years we've seen companies make it more and more front and center of their strategies, but keep missing these goals. So those priorities won't go away, and it seems like the pressure behind, the challenges behind get bigger and bigger every year. So I'm just making a point here that there are some goals we really have to achieve, and these goals matter, the goal-setting process behind matters, and if we, all of us, want to help our organizations to achieve those goals, we have to talk about the how. Yeah? And we have to think about why we do not succeed and did not succeed in the past. Because it's quite obvious, no matter who you ask or who does the research, if it is BCG or Harvard Business Review, all of those studies show towards a similar direction, and that is that a majority of strategic goals and company priorities never gets achieved as intended. Yeah? It's only about 70% of those goals, they never really work, and only about 60% of those goals that work, only 60% of the value, the business value of those goals really materializes for the company, so something is obviously wrong. Something I can tell you, it's definitely not a lack of goals that we're facing here. That is not the problem. It is how we approach our goals, obviously, how we define goals, how we pursue goals, and how we collaborate around goals and priorities that we set for ourselves. It's clear that we all have an abundance of projects, target metrics, deadlines, meetings. I think to many of us, it feels like we're stuck in systems around us where we're just overwhelmed. And the problem definitely is not that we're not working hard enough or long enough. Yeah? But still, you've seen the number, something somehow doesn't seem to work about it. So a theme that I think has been rising at Workpath, and we've been continuously talking about the last couple of months and years, is a goal is not a goal. There's a lot of things around us in our day-to-day work, in our calendars, in our project management tools, what we call goals, but it's not really goals, it's just things that keep us busy. So one thing that clearly has to change is that we have to become more intentional about what is goals and what is goal setting. What is a goal that sets us up for success, and how do we need to collaborate around and towards that goal so we can actually succeed? So a goal is not a goal. And we are convinced that the solution to a lot of this is really a simple idea that we take very seriously. The solution to a lot of problems around goal setting and not achieving goals, but also what the Outcome Economy Summit is all about what Workpath is all about. It's all really based on one simple idea. And for those of you who've been working with us maybe for some time already, you might guess it, but we are convinced that our work and how we collaborate has to be just much more about outcomes. We don't deserve just input and output work and just being busy. We really have to focus on value and always thinking about, like, if we set goals, if we pursue goals, what's the value for whom? That has to be front and center. For us as individuals working, that's where purpose comes from. But also, as I will talk about in a second, we talk about our organizations, our business models, and our leaders, our leadership and governance style. So how our brain works, it's very, very easy to just write down projects and tasks, right? What do you want to do? Put it in there, let's go for it. But what do you want to achieve with it? It's such a simple and obvious question, but it's still, I think, interesting how difficult it is to answer sometimes. And if you are working in a larger organization, the larger and the more complex the organization gets, the more you realize a lot of people are very far away from having answers to these kind of questions on a day-to-day basis. We all know probably some of the revenue targets and growth targets of our companies, but the management board shares there. But what value are we creating for what kind of customers that will ultimately generate those revenues, right? Those are very different questions, and again, every time I say them, I feel like this is so obvious. This is basically the essence of what makes a company work, a business work. And still, and I can say, like, we are a small company at Workpath, a relatively small company, but as you grow, as you have more people joining, those questions are not that obvious to answer anymore. It's not that simple. So today is about rethinking how we understand goal setting and what is a goal and how do we pursue goals, and about being more intentional about goals, because a goal is not a goal. All these buzzwords, right? We also have some partners here. We all know what customers are looking for, right? Everyone's looking for transparency, alignment, focus, but those are very empty buzzwords if you are not intentional about the outcomes behind. Yeah? You can be as transparent as you want, as aligned as you want, as focused as you want, but if you're just focused on stupid projects that create no value, if you're just aligned with your line manager in your silo, you might improve in those kind of things and you might spend a lot of money on those kind of change efforts, but you have to be focused on the right kind of outcomes. You have to be aligned around outcomes, which is usually cross-departmental alignment across silos. So it always goes back to what are the outcomes we're pursuing here, what's the value for what kind of customer, and only if we can answer that, we actually have a chance. So I'm very convinced that we do not need more projects, more metrics, more goals, and more KPI clutter. Here another dashboard, and let's look at those kind of metrics as well. We need more intentional focus and structure. We need more focus on outcomes and structures that are all directed towards outcomes. That's the kind of change we are convinced as a company, but also with you as a community, that we have to work towards. And here's why we have initiated the Outcome Economy Summit and why we are meeting here today and why we have hundreds of people joining online. We think that outcomes and outcome thinking, outcome-oriented leadership has always been a good thing, but only in the last couple of years it has really become mandatory. As I've shown some of those challenging goals, I really think and feel that with the 2020s, we have entered a new era where there are some goals that are very demanding and we cannot afford missing, but at the same time, the surrounding and the volatility, uncertainty makes it harder than ever to achieve goals at all, and that is why we think we have to change things and have to be aware that this is a new time, and this new time we call the outcome economy. The outcome economy for us is an era where everyone, customers, professionals, companies, everyone in our ecosystem, all stakeholders are more focused on the outcomes that companies provide, that jobs provide. What value are we creating? Why do we exist? And everything is drifting towards outcomes. The most important thing here is the outcome economy is already here, and we don't have a choice. Yeah? We already live with outcome-based business models all around us. We are looking for outcome-based jobs, and we need to drive towards outcome-based and outcome-centered organizations. And most importantly, we need to have more outcome-driven leadership and governance models. It's driven by customers, it's driven by employees, by everyone who has a job, people who have ambitions there, that things are more focused on outcomes, and that's where we're in. I think one of the most important and interesting things is the business models. Yeah? I don't know who still listens to CDs or watches DVDs on a regular basis. Right? We know this in our private life. We don't really buy hardware. We pay for outcomes. We pay for value, for experiences. I live in an urban area in Munich, so this morning we came here with car sharing. There's a lot of people that don't see why they should have such a heavy and expensive asset that is basically in the parking lot 95% of the time unused. So I'm paying for the outcome of getting from A to B for a nice driving experience maybe, but definitely not owning a car. And that's not just B2C, it's also B2B. A lot of airlines, if you have an airplane, you don't have to buy the airplane engines anymore. You pay Rolls-Royce for how many miles you're flying. It's asset-free, basically, and you only get everything you want. You get, basically, depending on the mileage you're taking, or the miles you're flying, that's what you pay for. And most obviously, Workpath's business model, Salesforce, actually every leading B2B SaaS company, software as a service company in our industry, is based on an outcome-based business model where nobody has to buy software on-premise and then do the hosting and the updating and the maintenance and all of that yourself. You basically open your browser and you get the outcomes you expect from a solution like that. And there's so much behind that kind of business model, right? It is superior in almost every dimension. It's more attractive for the providers, financially, of course, because you have people paying upfront and you pay for the relationship and the quality of the outcomes. You don't pay for products. You usually have a better connection. You have more data. You know how people use your services and what they get from it. So later we will hear about OKRs and innovation. Those companies are more innovative because you just know what your customers want much better, right? A software as a service company knows exactly how users are behaving in a product. If you just send them a CD-ROM and you know they somehow use a product, you don't have these insights. And then I talked about those big goals, right? We talked about fighting climate change, stopping global warming. outcome-based business models are also a prerequisite for a more circular economy, where we don't just buy products and keep them, but the people who produce, the companies that produce the products, they actually own them, they provide us the outcomes, but they have a lot of more data and centralized intelligence about continuously optimizing car fleets, for example, continuously recycling products, so you always have the most sustainable solutions in the markets. So the outcome economy is also the way towards a more circular, a more sustainable economy. And last but not least, from a pure business perspective, you can see it in the stock prices, right? You can see how Apple stocks keep rising and rising, and it's not because they sell more iPhones, it's because the percentage of revenues they're making from outcome, from subscription-based business models is rising. So I'm making a bet here that in the next 3 years there will be an even broader subscription from Apple where you get your MacBook, your iPhone, everything as a subscription bundle, basically where you get the Apple experience, the outcomes. You always have the newest products, but you don't pay for the products, you pay for the experience. And that is coming everywhere. I'm convinced there's probably only very, very few industries that will not be affected by this. And now is about deciding, are you being a leader there, or are you being maybe disruptive by others who come in there? And then outcome-based business models need outcome-based organizations and jobs. And this is driven from multiple angles, right? I mentioned the talent challenge. I mentioned that people today, and I don't think that's just in white-collar jobs, want to know, why do I come to work? And they want to connect to the customer and the value they are creating. But it's also organizational science. If you want to sell outcomes, you have to build your organization and you have to organize your teams around outcomes. That's Conway's law, who's a bit more into the depthness of organizational science there. And our organizational models today are just not built around outcomes. They're built around output. They are built around functions, which is the most efficient and most cost control model that we could find throughout the industrial age, where the industrial age was all about selling products in a very efficient manner. Yeah. But over the last 10 years, and we will hear a lot about this today, organizations have become and have to become much more hybrid models, where teams and individuals, again, organize around outcomes, around value they create, where you leave your silo and you're not just defined by the function you're a part of, but you meet with other cross-functional members of your company and your team to create certain outcomes in a more dynamic and a more network-like structure. And that comes with a lot of challenges, and the biggest challenge, the most important driver for more outcome-centered organizations is outcome-driven governance and leadership. Gartner did a study about why outcome-based governance and leadership is important, and what are some of the most important skills and character traits of outcome-driven leaders. And of course, the most important thing they gathered in that study is it's outcomes over outputs. And it's about managing constant change, because while the environment might be more uncertain, more volatile, you have to make sure that the outcomes are clear for everyone and they don't change. And the roadmap there, the plan towards that outcome, might change all the time. That's why it is even more important to measure everything all the time and to create systems of execution that make sure you are moving towards these outcomes. But for me, and I think that's the part of a lot of conversations we are having with the companies we're working with, is autonomy and trust is just something that in those kind of organizations I've just shown, the centralized pyramids, is not something that is there by default. And I think that's, for us as leaders, one of the most challenging transformations, because the organizational design and how we've been working the last 80 years there, it doesn't really allow teams to be autonomous, but it also doesn't really build the trust and the skills in teams to work autonomously. So somehow leaders have to let go, and building trust in that transition phase is just something where I think understandably a lot of us are struggling and challenging, but it is important for us to understand how important that is as a foundation for any kind of outcome-based organization, outcome-based business model, and then success in the kind of economy I've been describing. And coming towards an end, I want to emphasize that you can look at this also from a much broader and more universal perspective on leadership. Yeah? Mariana Mazzucato, a very popular economist, she wrote the book Mission Economy, where she made a point about how also we in our governments, in our public institutions and political organizations, but also in public-private partnerships, we have to be more mission-based, how she called it. Yeah? I feel like the last 16 to 18 years, we've rather, at least in this country, been in a state where we've been managing the status quo and preventing crisis, obviously an important thing. But I think it's really, really important, coming back to some of those big challenges and goals that I shared, to make sure we have very clear outcomes and to provide ecosystem, to write an infrastructure where everyone can work towards those outcomes based on the principles I just showed. Just as one example, she worked with the European Commission, where they defined those mission maps, a very clear outcome, in this case about carbon-neutral European cities. And then they defined the most important drivers influencing that. And you can see this almost looks like drafting an OKR, right? So outcome-driven leadership and governance, I think, is more than just business. I think it's really a mindset. It's a cultural shift that is bigger than a lot of what we face in our day-to-day work and reality in organizations. The answer to all of that is what we call outcome management. We are a technology company, a software company, so for us it's a lot about the outcome management platform that we built. We want to make sure that not just all teams in an organization are enabled to define high clarity, high quality outcomes, and then are enabled to, with all the other processes and tools, can work towards those outcomes. But I also want to emphasize that we know, and I think that is really part of our DNA, that this is not just a software or a technological challenge. Yeah. Yes, my vision as a founder is that all of our calendar apps and productivity tools and financial and portfolio management tools, or you name it, will have an outcome button. Yes, we do work with technology as a tool to make sure no matter where we are and what we do, it's easier to prioritize and it's easier to connect our day-to-day work to meaningful outcomes, to value for customers we are conscious of. But we, as a company, we also know it's much more about a lot of dimension. It's about people, it's about change management, and those dimensions we will talk about with you today. And this is where I'm really looking forward to learn from each other as a community. Just one teaser that I'm very excited about. We will have our colleague Stefan later talk about insights and metrics. We do a lot of research around the outcome economy and outcome management. And there are very strong indicators that companies that work in a more outcome-mannered way, they actually do have a much higher probability to achieve their goals. 25 to 35%, depending on the overall setup. And I think that's really exciting. That's one of the sessions that we will hear later. And then, as I said, many of the sessions we have, the workshops, are not just about process designs, organizational designs, but really about the people side of things. Leadership, mindset, cultural change. This is where we definitely have to talk about. And with that, just some guiding questions for us, right? Again, personally, I'm very curious, how can we help our colleagues, our teams, to become more outcome-oriented? How can we make goal setting and planning more outcome-oriented? How can we make our budgeting processes more outcome-oriented, where you don't give budgets to big projects or managers for the next 3 years, but to outcomes? Your projects, your day-to-day tasks, how can we make that streamlined more towards outcomes? Meetings, there's basically all dimensions of our day-to-day work that I think would benefit from being more outcome-oriented.